Tuesday, June 14, 1966. Discourse on the Bhagavad Gita.
You are saying that those who want to live exclusively meditative life should be moderate in their food, in their sleep, in their activities, in everything. They should not eat too much, nor should they fast too much. They should not sleep too much, nor should they sleep too little. They should be moderate in everything. Nor should they work too much. Not that Gita says one should not work. But yes, Gita sometimes says work very, very hard as much as you can. It is at the training period. You must know how to work in a right spirit. Thereby you will have self-purification. Then you will be fit for meditative life. Then when you take to meditative life exclusively, at that time you should not work too hard. For the simple reason, if you work too hard and then go at once, you sit cross-legged, you cannot meditate. It will take a long time before your mind becomes calmed down unless you have been trained by doing works in the right spirit. If you can do works in the right spirit, however, worrying the works, you will have very serenity. You will be able to retain your calmness. So those who are expert, they can switch on from works to meditation. They are expert. But for ordinary persons, they should not be engaged in too much activities. If they want to, spend more time in meditation. And if you want to really do meditation is not daydreaming. So it is necessary. One should live a very regulating life. You cannot afford to sit up 2 o'clock and oversleep till 10 o'clock, and at 10:30 you sleep for meditation. You cannot do that. There are certain hours which are more suitable for meditation. It's early hours in the morning, from 4 to 6. Some persons meditate even from 3. But you don't attempt to meditate at 3 o'clock. Then the time in the evening, it is very suitable. And it is in the midnight, it is very suitable. There are certain hours very suitable. But that should be done with proper attention to health. You know, Buddha knew to his own cost that too much asceticism does not pay. He learned afterwards that he should be moderate, and he prescribed very much. One should not. He would say that a string, when it is pitched too high, you don't get the sound. And the string is too slack, you don't get the music. One should follow the middle path. Then what does happen when one becomes successful in meditation? It is said, the mind becomes calm, mind becomes under control, then mind becomes fixed on the self, higher self or God or the object of meditation. As we meditate, mind begins to be calm, and gradually it becomes calmer and calmer, then it becomes fixed on the object of meditation. It fixed on the object of meditation. And at that time, then one loses all attachment to any earthly things. All desires will have vanished. And one's thoughts will be fixed on the self or the object of meditation. That state is called the state of perfection in meditation. One thing to be noted, you begin to try to meditate, and for a long period mind may not become calm at all. it might be just like fighting with the winds. Then mind begins to become calm. You try it that way. Then through sufficient practice, the mind becomes fixed on the object of meditation, the self or God, or what you choose as your chosen ideal. And then all desires vanish, all doubts go away. First, you try to meditate, to make the mind calm. And then when you have succeeded, then all desires will vanish. You get something higher, and therefore lower desires, all these things are lower desires. The highest desires is the knowledge of the self. That gives you the greatest amount of joy. So it comes that way. When you reach the object of meditation, and then all other desires vanish, all doubts go away, all your karmas are cut asunder. That state is called the state of perfection in meditation. Another illustration is given. At a place where there is no wind, the light does not flicker. In the same way, when one becomes perfect in meditation, one's mind becomes perfectly calm, just like a light without the least flickering. Rarely you find the light does not flicker, but there is some kind of wind. In the same way, rarely does the mind become calm for ordinary persons. Through long practice, and when mind becomes calm, it becomes like the light without the slightest flickering. At that state, the lower self is altogether attenuated. The heart becomes purified. Previously, those who come for meditation, it is expected that they have done some works with spiritual motive. Then there has been certain degrees of self-purification. By unselfish work, you can have self-purification to a certain extent. But the rest is done when you do meditation. By meditation, the subtle desires are eliminated. So, through self-purification, you develop greater power of meditation. And in that case, mind becomes completely fixed on the object of meditation. It does no longer flicker. It does no longer waver. These two verses describe what happens at the time of deep meditation. This is called transcendental experience. This is called superconscious state. This is called the state of samadhi. Mind becomes perfectly purified. Purified is mind is no longer mind. It becomes self-knowledge. Mind is always wandering, mind has desires and so on. When mind is perfectly calm, it is no longer mind. It has become knowledge. It has become thought itself. With that mind, one does not think. To think, you require three things: the object of thought, acts of thought, and one who thinks. These three things are necessary even to meditate. Object of meditation, the act of meditating, and you are meditating. In that state, there is the mind. Mind is not perfectly purified. It might be mind has been to a certain extent been purified through unselfish work and giving some capacity to meditate, And when through course of meditation it becomes perfect, then the mind becomes completely purified. The mind does no longer give any trouble. It does no longer become restless. And so it is said that a perfectly purified mind is perfect knowledge. It is Brahman. It is no longer mind. So that is the state of perfection in meditation. Now, what is the outcome of this deep meditation? What does happen in this deep meditation? In other words, what does happen in samadhi, as they say? Samadhi means superconscious state. The Upanishads will say that state cannot be described by human language. It is perfectly logical. You see, here the mind has transcended itself. Mind is no longer mind of thinking, mind which thinks, mind which desires, mind which has likes and dislikes. It is no longer mind. Mind has transcended itself. So what happens in that state? Next 3 or 4 verses describe what happens in a state of samadhi. Though it cannot be described, by indications it describes or gives an idea of what it is. Why people are so anxious to meditate. Why those who have succeeded in meditation speak so highly of meditation. Why do they say the object of life is to become perfect in meditation? The object of life is to have perfect control over one's mind. No longer in slavery to mind. No longer one is to suffer from the tyranny of mind. The real problem of our life is that we have no control of our mind. It is said war begins in the minds of men. Even international war, big wars, begin in the minds of men. And our troubles also begins in our own minds. It is not that others are to blame. No one but me to blame. Why do you become so brittle? Swami Brahmananda therefore would say, you add lies to your miseries when you say that other persons have made you unhappy. When you complain of circumstances, you complain of other persons. They did this and that, so you are unhappy. It's a big lie. You become unhappy because you are brittle, because you have no control over your mind. Those persons who have no control over their mind at all will say this world is full of misery. It's an evil world. Those persons who have certain amount of control over their minds, they will say it's a mixture of good and evil. Those who have perfect control over their minds, they will say it is all good, it's all happiness, they will say. It's the face of God they will see everywhere. So it comes to these things. The trouble arises in our minds. We ourselves are to blame in ultimate analysis. So here it is. When the mind is perfectly under control, or when the mind has become perfectly purified, or when the mind has transcended itself, when the mind has been fixed completely on the object of meditation, you may say God, you may say the self, whatever you like. The mind has become perfectly fixed on the object of meditation. So much so, Swami Vivekananda experimented meditating on a black spot. He could experiment with everything. He could do that because before that he had developed control over his mind. Sometimes he just meditated on a black spot and he began to have experiences. In any case, when the mind becomes perfectly under control, when it becomes under control, when the waves of the mind have become calm, or you have been able to calm down the waves of your mind. And in that state, that your lower self has been attenuated, purified. Mind has become purified. And your mind has become fixed on the self. You have realized your higher self. One remains fixed on the higher self. Lower self is altogether gone. Then it would be a state of supreme bliss. How does it come? There are certain terms here in the Gita it is used, which are the terms common in yoga books, standard yoga books. I was going to say it is taken from yoga books, but we cannot say that. That simultaneously these things could be described. So just to give a little details. Here it said, when the mind becomes perfectly calm after controlling or restraining the waves of the mind. In yoga book, the first important aphorism is, what is the purpose of yoga? Here yoga means meditation. The purpose of meditation is to restrain the modifications or the forms of mind. The mind works in a human level because constantly there are waves, there are forms of the mind. It is something like the surface of a lake. The wind blows and the surface of the lake become full of waves, low waves, high waves, mountain high waves, as it were. This is the same case with our mind also. In the mind also, there are waves, there are ripples, there are waves, there are high waves, and there are upsetting or disturbing waves. Yoga means, or meditation means, to restrain those waves, those modifications of the mind. Mind is always undergoing modifications constantly. So yoga book analyzes what are the states. All those modifications can be classified under 5 classes. First, the mind is always restless, one state. Another state, the mind goes wrong, does wrong. Mind becomes dull. It does not like to think. It does not like to meditate. And mind is in a condition of sleep. This is one state. The mind becomes dull. First, the mind is restless, extremely restless. The second state, or not second, just in course of enumeration. Another state, let us say, the state of dullness, sleep, dullness, the mind becomes perverted. Then its state, mind becomes a little calm. Those, especially for those who do some practice in meditation, or even in ordinary life, scientists, poets, for them mind becomes calm because of intense thinking. Wordsworth said that his mind became so calm that his corporeal breath was stopped, and he saw unity behind this universe. It is almost like mind becomes in samadhi, in transcendental state. With reference to that state, Professor of Swami Brahmananda said, if you want to see ocular demonstrative proof that such things can happen, and such things happen in the life of Wordsworth, you go to Dakshineshwar to see Ramakrishna. So for them also, mind becomes calm. But it might be, it's just a glimpse through imagination, because it did not transform the life at all. It might be through imagination, mind became to a certain extent calm, and one could visualize. Through poetic imagination, one could visualize what happened. So it may not be exactly experienced, but the description is like the description of an experience. In any case, mind became such a little calm, sufficiently calm to visualize such state. Scientists said, I heard of a scientist, his mind, when mind would become very calm, he would see some bright light and so on. I did not hear directly, I heard from somebody. In any case, there is a state when mind becomes to a certain extent calm, at least on occasions when the mind becomes concentrated. But it depends on what there is the concentration. If you have concentration on worldly things, you will succeed in worldly subjects. But in any case, it indicates that mind can become a little calm. for the time being, not for a long time, to a certain extent. To a little extent, not certain, a little calmness. Then mind becomes now and then calm, really calm. It does not succeed. Now and then it becomes calm. So those who practice meditation, it might be that sometimes you'll find a calmness, a little calmness has come. A little calmness will come to average persons, to many persons, average persons. If one does meditation really according to directions or according to understanding, right understanding, to a certain extent, at least sometime mind will become a little calm. One will have a glimpse that it comes. Mind can become calm. One will surely find it if one does it in the right process. But it's just the beginning. It is the third state. Then mind becomes now and then really calm. If it does not, even if it not reaches the highest state, mind will become very calm, but it does not last there. At intervals it will come, now and then it will come. And the last state is mind becomes perfectly calm. These are the 5 stages. These are the 5 stages of mind. These are the 5 modifications of mind to classify them. Otherwise, mind modifications are so large that they cannot be enumerated. The yoga says, in meditation, all these 5 classes, including just all the modifications, the mind becomes perfectly calm. Calm means there has been restraint. The modifications of the mind have been under control, have been restrained by human efforts, by rather say through efforts. Natural condition is to be always disturbed, but through practice of meditation, the mind has become calm, perfectly calm. So here it said, when one has become perfect in meditation, the mind has been under control. Modifications of the mind have become completely restrained, have been completely controlled. And at that place, at that state, mind will be fixed on God, fixed on the object of the self, at the highest self, whatever maybe to say. Whatever, even if you do not give any name. Buddha did not give any name, but in that state he had the enlightenment. Buddha did not speak, did not describe what that state was in some popular name. He said it was Buddha. It was Buddhatta. That means enlightenment. Buddha means knowledge. It was the state of knowledge in that state. That means that in that state, I said, one has got the perfect knowledge. The knowledge which you get with our disturbing mind, with our mind which is restless, that knowledge is not perfect. When the mind has become perfectly under control, it has become one with the oneness behind this universe. It has reached that state. It has reached that knowledge by knowing which everything else is known. So it describes that is the state. The state of perfect knowledge, and the mind fixed on the object of knowledge, or the mind has become one, perfectly oneness. Naturally, that state is a state of vacuity. It is not a state of annihilation. From one standpoint, it's a state of the destruction of mind. But destruction of mind means ordinary mind. But actually it is not destruction. Mind has found out its own reality. It is the state of the essence of mind. It is a state of pure mind. It is pure mind, no longer relative mind. And that state is a state of great bliss. It is not a state of annihilation. It is not a state of negative things. It's a positive thing. It's a state of perfect bliss. Even in Nirvana, Buddha said, it is paramam sukham. It is a state of supreme bliss. How to describe that supreme bliss? And how can one realize that? The Gita, in the next verse it says, that state is a state of extreme joy, which cannot be described, nor cannot be perceived by senses. It cannot be perceived by senses for the simple reason it is not an object of sense. It is not sense object. It is not an ordinary sense object which you perceive by your senses, by your ear, by your eyes, by your nose. It cannot be reached by senses. It is beyond the reach of senses. But then how do you feel it? You simply feel it by your heart, by your pure heart. You simply feel it. But it cannot be described, cannot be reached by any sense. It is not reached by senses, but it is a state of extreme bliss, super sensuous bliss, and it is a state of super consciousness. So the Upanishad says that cannot be described in words. Even thoughts come back, baffled, to reach that state. In that state, there is no thinking. It is thought itself. It is knowledge itself. It is not a state of knowledge. It is not a state of knowing. It is a state of absolute. It is a state of absolute knowledge. It is a state of supreme bliss. It is a state of supreme bliss. The Upanishad says a fraction of that bliss is luring the whole human population or all created beings to feverish activities. All are in search of happiness, but they do not get it. But they get the shadow of that bliss. They do not get the substance that lured by a fraction of that bliss. It is a state of supreme bliss. It cannot be described. And naturally, that is a state of bliss by getting which you do not care for anything else in the world. After that, everything will seem insipid. A follower of Christ, Indian follower of Christ, he came to Ramakrishna. He said before to Ramakrishna, there are other disciples, so these things are noted down. And he said, what happened when you had the vision of Christ? He said, it was a state of supreme bliss and such a great beauty that anything else in the world will seem insipid in comparison with that. You see, he did not know Upanishads. He spoke from his own experience. He might not have known Buddha or Buddhism. In any case, from his own experience he described. And its beauty was so great. The joy was so great. So nothing in the world can compare with that. So the Gita says that when one has got that bliss, one does not go after anything else. Everything else seems insipid. Yes, Ramakrishna says everything has been defiled. Only the pure knowledge, which is pure bliss, has not been defiled. And by getting which, you do not go after anything. You do not care for anything. You become self-sufficient, not in an egocentric sense. You have found out the source of all being. You have found out the source of all existence. You have found out the source of all knowledge. You have found out the source of all bliss. What else do you want in life? So they said, by getting which, you do not care for anything else. By getting that bliss, you do not consider any bliss, any joy, what that can be compared with that. And that is the knowledge, by getting which you do not care for any other thing, any other knowledge. By getting that, you solve the riddle of life and death. You see the meaning of life. You find the meaning of existence. What else do you want? So that is a state. When you reach that, you are no longer disturbed by anything in the world. problems of the world do not bother you anymore. They are no longer problems. They cannot affect your serenity of mind. They cannot disturb your joy. Nothing else in the world can disturb you anymore. That is the state. That is the state of mind when one reaches that state, when mind transcends itself. Let us stop. Anybody is welcome to ask any question. Yes.
Swami, you said in the beginning that before one has calmed, before the mind is calm, you blame circumstances and people. But of course, sometimes people actually do harm you, and you experience that harm done to you. Do you mean that you have to withdraw your mind from the harm done and try to change circumstances? Or?
You would not feel that one can do any harm to you. Harm will become disturbed in our mind. Mind does not become disturbed. So if you're just like children, they're trying to do you harm, that they cannot do any harm to you.
Oh, but I don't mean when we have reached the highest. I mean before that.
To that extent, he feels less and less disturbed. By understanding the highest, you understand the smaller thing also. When the mind has become to a certain extent calm, so you can to a certain extent stand the nonsense from the world. You see? Then when your mind becomes more and more calm, more and more powerful, you can stand greater and greater nonsense of the world. Yes?
Tell me, is everybody's dharma different?
Huh?
Is everybody's dharma different? I mean, like a
Is every dharma different, Swami?
Huh?
Is everybody's dharma different? I mean, the inner law that differs according to the constitution of the individual. Is everybody's dharma to a certain extent different?
Everybody is different. Everybody is different. You need not ask that question. You find somebody is a saint, somebody is a scoundrel. Let us stop.